One of the key signs that Sega knew it would have to change its business, even before they stopped production of the Dreamcast, was when the company spun off all of its internal development studios into their own independent companies during the summer of 2000. Ostensibly, this was to increase their efficiency and profitability to the parent company, but roughly 6 months later, when the writing was on the wall for the Dreamcast, it became clear that this was effectively Sega Corporate's way of letting its talent loose, in order to follow whatever path they thought would be best for the kinds of games that they would make in a new world where they would no longer need to stick to Sega's hardware. A few of their studios gravitated towards the PlayStation 2, although there was certainly a bit of animus there since that system had just made mincemeat out of the Dreamcast. Many of them moved towards the Xbox as the shiny new player riding onto the scene. 2 studios chose to stake their fortunes to Nintendo's chances with the GameCube. One was Sonic Team, long famous for its admiration of Nintendo's work. The other was Amusement Visions, one of the newest and youngest of Sega's internal studios. Amusement Visions was started by Toshihiro Nagoshi, a veteran of the famous AM2 team and a protege of Yu Suzuki himself. While AM2 turned attention inward toward the Shenmue project, Nagoshi asked for and was granted a new team that continued the tradition of working on arcade games that followed in the vein of some of Sega's classics, such as Planet Harriers and Slash Out. In fact, Amusement Visions only made one Dreamcast game, with its version of Daytona USA, which wouldn't even reach the US system until after the Dreamcast had already been discontinued in 2001. But one of its newest projects that year would be a new arcade game called Monkey Ball. Nagoshi would say in an interview with GameSpot later that year that his team was looking to try something new in order to break the mold from the kinds of games they'd made before. It was also meant to be a game that was easily understandable and accessible to a general audience, something he thought that the industry was getting away from at that time. The premise of Monkey Ball was incredibly simple and mirrors the 1984 arcade hit Marble Madness, which was actually made by a former Sega alumni, Mark Cerny, before he joined Sega in the mid-1980s. The game puts the player not in control of a ball moving it over the surface of various platforms, but actually puts you in control of the platforms themselves as you tilt and turn them in order to use momentum and gravity to steer the ball in the direction towards the goal. The development team decided that a plain old ball would be boring, so they added cute monkey characters to the inside of the ball to make them more visually interesting, as well as giving the player more emotional investment in the fate of that rolling ball. Monkey Ball would debut at the Japanese Amusement Operator Union trade show in May of 2001. Since the game was made for the Naomi board that the Dreamcast was based on, early reporting said that Sega planned for a Dreamcast version, at least in the Japanese market. But just a week or two later at E3, Sega would begin rolling out its official announcements of its first third-party games for other systems, and it would list Super Monkey Ball alongside Phantasy Star Online and Virtua Striker 3 as their first 3 games due out for the GameCube. Roughly a month later at the World Hobby Fair, Sega would even confirm that Super Monkey Ball would be a launch title at the system's Japanese launch on September 14th, which would end up making it the only one of the 3 games at the Japanese launch not made by Nintendo. It would also make it the first game they published for another company's console since they pulled the plug on the Dreamcast a few months earlier. Despite this very quick turnaround time from unveiling the game to getting it on the GameCube for the launch, Amusement Vision absolutely went the extra mile to make the home version far more feature-packed than the arcade game, hence it being titled Super Monkey Ball for the GameCube. The original arcade game featured just 3 characters and was a single-player-only game. The home version added a 4th character, and the entire arcade mode was just one of the 3 modes in the game on the home console version. 2 more modes were added in as well, the party games and the minigames, both of which put the game's engine to very good and clever use in creative ways. In addition, the game also became multiplayer virtually across the board. Now, this addressed one of the biggest problems Sega's arcade games often had when they were ported to home consoles. They were usually too short and bereft of content when not being played on a quarter-by-quarter basis. In fact, the game initially locks away the minigame section until you earn enough points in the main game mode to purchase each of them, which is something that'll definitely force you to put in a fair amount of time on the regular levels in order to earn it. With 10 basic levels, 30 advanced levels, and 50 expert levels, there's also plenty of content in the regular main game mode to keep you coming back. In fact, this is actually one of those games that hides behind a veneer of cutesy characters and excruciatingly difficult gauntlet of challenges. None of which are unfair at all. They simply require dedication, repetition, and practice to figure out how they work and what you need to do to get around them. Naturally, based on the gameplay, this game largely works thanks to its very accurate and advanced physics models, since after the beginner levels, it's largely an exercise in figuring out how to employ momentum and gravity to reach your goals and overcome certain obstacles. That said, the cutesy veneer is also very effective, as the graphical style behind the game is simultaneously both simple, yet also still beautiful. A prime example of having a strong and consistent art direction, with characters that are full of color, even with their very simple shading, environments that have rich texture work, and clean, anti-aliased edges to make everything look incredibly smooth, which is something very important to a game based largely on being in motion. Also critical to controlling motion would be the controls, which all really just come down to the joystick, since there's no other controls outside of some button pressing in the minigame. Of course, for the game to work at all, these have to be spot on, and they are. You can almost feel the weight behind controlling the environment like you might when steering a car, and the slightest movement of the stick is perfectly responsive to the tiniest movements needed to tilt things just so slightly in the right direction. While the main game levels are certainly the meat and potatoes of the experience, the sides are nothing to be scoffed at, and might even become your favorite part of the game, especially in multiplayer. With the party games consisting of Monkey Fight, a pretty straightforward implementation of a very kinetic little fighting game, and then there's Monkey Race, which takes the mechanics of the game to make a pretty unique and fun kart racing style experience. Finally, there's Monkey Target, which is the masterpiece of the party games, whereby each player takes turns flying down the momentum ramp and launching their ball as high as possible, followed by releasing their wings and riding the air they've achieved and trying to land their monkey on a giant floating target akin to a Pilot Wings challenge, but with a Super Monkey Ball twist. The minigames, once you unlock them, are a little more anticlimactic compared to the party games, but are still solid implementations of some classic games like golf and billiards, which largely play like video game versions of these sports, just with the Monkey Ball characters standing in for the game ball. The exception is the bowling game, which doesn't give you straight up control over the direction you're going to toss the ball down the lane, but instead has you try your wits at a moving target to line up the best possible shot you can, and then giving you control over your ball's spin in order to try to correct for what's very likely going to be a terrible toss off the alley if you don't take action. It's not what you'd expect at first, but once you figure out what it wants you to do, it's an interesting take on it, putting the game's physics to use more than they would in a regular game of bowling. Overall, Super Monkey Ball is a very well-rounded and high-quality package, proof positive that Sega's newly liberated development studios could survive and thrive beyond Sega hardware, particularly if they stuck to their strengths and picked their audience appropriately. In fact, the game would go on to be one of Sega's biggest hits as a third-party publisher that year, and remained a perennial bestseller for them all through the next coming year. Considering the simplicity of the concept, it's a testament to the importance of simple, fun, compelling gameplay.